to another story, which is one that's really interesting to me, which is about the role that British nationals play in going to fight for Israel. Now, Israel has been called a apartheid state by the two major human rights groups in the United States and the UK, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty. It is on record for years and years and years as perpetrating countless violations of international law daily, effectively, in the West Bank before the current war crime filled campaign in Gaza. And yet you have British nationals going and fighting in an army that is enforcing an apartheid state and enforcing and perpetrating regular war crimes. Now, to me, that sounds like that should have legal implications. And I think you talk to quite a lot of lawyers about what the legal implications are. And I'll just finish with this. Another noticeable thing about following the attack on Gaza over the last 6 weeks has been how a lot of the Israeli militaries and government officials that are coming on TV around the world to defend Israeli policies have British accents. There's one Scottish one. There's one from London that's recently come on. There seems to be a big cohort of Brits just as the outward-facing face of Israel. So can you just talk about the role that British nationals are playing in the military and in the diplomatic side?
Absolutely. Well, let's just play that clip that you mentioned of the IDF spokesman with the very strong Scottish accent, where he goes on CNN and seems very relaxed about a huge massacre of civilians.
This is the tragedy of war, Wolf. I mean, as you know, we've been saying for days, move south. Civilians that are not involved with Hamas, please move south.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a little bit more information. You knew there were civilians there. You knew there were refugees, all sorts of refugees, but you decided to still drop a bomb on that refugee camp attempting to kill the Hamas commander. By the way, was he killed?
I can't confirm yet. There'll be more updated. Yes, we know that he was killed. About the civilians there, we're doing everything we can to minimize.
So what we heard there was just one example of a very senior person in the IDF who emigrated to Israel from Britain and seems to have faced no legal difficulties whatsoever in serving in their military, despite it being in permanent violation of international law through its illegal occupation of the West Bank. What I looked at in my research was I started with a meeting where Boris Johnson flew out recently to Jerusalem, and he was pictured meeting a whole group of British IDF reservists, including people who we know had served in the West Bank and had guarded illegal settlements. And I guess the reason why I'm particularly interested in this is because I wrote a book about mercenaries. I'm very interested in the law around kind of foreign fighters. And you can see how, certain forms of mercenaryism or going abroad to fight is criminalized. Most noticeably, with people going out to Syria, even people who went to fight for the Kurds, who were on the same side as the UK, they faced legal consequences on their return. And also in Ukraine, Liz Truss, when she was Foreign Secretary, was very enthusiastic about people going out there, but actually quite quickly her more sensible colleagues in cabinet realised that this potentially wasn't such a good idea, and they tried to row back and tried at least publicly to discourage people from going out, even though I think in private very little changed. But what we see with Brits going out to join the IDF is there's just a complete open door. And the Met Police War Crimes Unit don't seem to pay any particular attention, even though they know that these people will almost inevitably be serving in the West Bank, where the IDF's function is to guard illegal settlements. When settlers go on the rampage against Palestinians, the IDF is then called in to back them up. So it seems like there's a real risk of them being involved in war crimes, and yet the Met Police, who have the responsibility in UK law to look out for this stuff, are just not interested at all. I remember during the Ukraine conflict, they announced that they'd set up a special unit or special investigation to monitor war crimes in Ukraine. And I was sort of thinking, well, I don't really see what jurisdiction they necessarily have. It's not as if they're saying UK nationals are participating in these war crimes. So, and yet here, where there's people openly going through Heathrow, being very public about what they're doing, they seem to face no consequences or scrutiny. There's even an organisation, I think it has a London office, that effectively it's like a recruitment office and offers subsidies and financial incentives for people to go out and join the IDF. I'll just play another clip because I think this shows kind of how high up this goes. This is of Lord Wolfson, who was a justice minister, I think during the last 2 years. I think he's since stood down. But just listen to what he has to say.
My son, who has now made his life in Israel, wore the uniform of the Israel Defence Forces. Like most 20-year-olds in Israel, he's doing military service. He personally saw the aftermath of Hamas's atrocities, sights which no 20-year-old, in fact no one, should see. But he's in uniform because if he and his friends were not in uniform, there wouldn't be an Israel.
So there we heard a former Tory minister, a former Tory justice minister, no less, saying that his son is actually out in Israel at the moment, serving in the IDF, and he's emigrated there from the UK. So I think this shows, how high up in government this kind of behaviour is being promoted. There was also an interview with Suella Braverman where she mentioned that some of her in-laws were also serving in the IDF. We don't know whether they are British nationals who went out or if they were born in Israel. But again, I mean, this shows the kind of acceptability that this activity has, despite, just by very virtue of illegally occupying the West Bank, they are in violation of international law, let alone, all the things that we've seen at the moment in Gaza.
There's a system we have where none of it applies. I'm talking about international law, diplomacy, military, every single element of the system that we're told we live in, and all these checks on the use of raw power, they're just thrown out the window when it comes to Israel. No one. It's funny when you're talking. I'm just thinking that a lot of the people you approached, they probably never even thought about it. They probably never had to qualify it. I'm talking about the government institutions. They're sort of like, okay, well, oh yeah, maybe this is problematic, but it's just so embedded in the system that Israel can do what it wants, and that makes everyone who's part of that complicit, because that is why it takes such liberties, is because it knows it can get away with it. It knows it can go on TV and just explain away and advertise war crimes, and there'll be no comeuppance. And that it goes back to an analogy I like, is the one of the schoolyard bully. If you have a schoolyard bully he's not being told off by the teachers, but he's been encouraged, then of course he's going to carry on doing it, and of course he's going to go harder and harder, and he's going to hurt more kids.